Hey friends, welcome back to our channel. It's June, and if by some miracle you haven't noticed yet, it's Pride Month. In the spirit of the month, we're going to take on the LGBT narrative, all but ensuring that this channel never gets monetized. But that's okay. Let's get into it. So first off, as a measure of how far we've come, we have a whole month dedicated to pride, one of the 7 deadly sins. Pride is the excessive belief and love in oneself. It denies God's grace and His necessity in our lives. In fact, pride is known as the sin from which all other sins arise. St. Thomas Aquinas tells us that inordinate self-love is the cause of every sin, and St. Augustine says that it was pride that turned angels into devils. So perhaps it's fitting, in the wrong kind of way, that pride is the word used to describe an entire month which is dedicated completely to the celebration of sexual deviancy. Now, I know what you're thinking. Are you suggesting that the LGBTQ movement is sexually immoral and deviant? Yes, I am.
Really? Can you feel the tension in the air right now?
Public perception would say that these ideas are far outside of the Overton window. The left has long since championed the LGBTQ movement, and the right, now having conceded ground on everywhere, is looking to posture themselves as the new champions of the movement.
This is
No,
what I am.
normal is not defined by your sexual orientation.
Yeah.
That's what normal. I'm not saying heterosexual is more normal. By the way, I actually believe bisexual is the norm.
Now, of course, the problem with this is that a true counter-narrative to this progressive agenda has taken a back seat. We've essentially given the left full autonomy to dishonestly script the narrative for the positions that we hold. This is obviously dangerous, because if you claim to be against the movement, you're immediately labeled as hateful, bigoted, homophobic, any number of other things. You're dishonestly represented in education, media, the film industry. Even friends and family who know you might start to silently question your character. So first, we have to reclaim the narrative. What exactly is it that we're opposed to? And in a later video, we'll address specifically what we're advocating for. Now this should go without saying, but I'm going to say it just to cover all my bases. None of us here claim to be perfect. Certainly none of us are saints. And anybody who does claim that, well, that's just a prideful lie. Homosexuality is far from the only sexual deviancy we recognize as immoral. The difference is there's no month dedicated to extramarital affairs, premarital sex. Haven't heard of any pornography month. Why is it that we celebrate homosexuality? Each of us struggles with sin and vice in our own way, and our opposition to that, no matter which sin it may be, always comes from a place of love and charity. But what's the big deal with homosexuality? Free love, right? Live and let live. Well, as we're gonna see, homosexuality harms not just the individual, but society holistically. And for us not to call that out, that's selfish and cowardly. So what started as a very libertarian plea for rights and just to be left alone has developed into something completely foreign. In addition to having a whole dedicated month, we now have cartoons on children's shows advocating for homosexuality. We have it being taught in our education. We have it being propagated by big companies. And it's even being propagated by government and the military. And this is all perhaps reflected by the rising rates of those who identify as LGBTQ. I showed this in our previous video when talking about Snapchat. But there's a very real problem here. This kind of flies in the face of suggesting that those who identify as all completely biological. The propagation of all this is disrupting the core family unit, and is continuing to place emphasis on sexual deviancy in all aspects of our life. And as we're about to see, that comes with some serious consequences. Homosexuals are more likely to develop mental illnesses than heterosexuals. Gay men are 6 times more likely to commit suicide than straight men. Gay men are far more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol as compared to their heterosexual counterparts. Gay men are 60 times more likely to contract HIV than straight men. The effects of all this amounts to a pretty sad reality. The life expectancy of homosexuals is about 20 years shorter than heterosexuals. And for the trans community, it's even worse. 41% of transsexuals have attempted suicide. And those who go through with the gender transition surgery are actually more likely to kill themselves. That's sad, especially when you know that the dominant prevailing narrative is suggesting that transsexuals should go through with their surgeries. 65% of transgender youth have seriously considered suicide within the last year. 37% of transsexual youth have attempted suicide within the last year. 85% of transsexuals show signs of psychological distress. 44% signs of clinical depression. Mental health and suicide attempts are perhaps the leading indicator that there's something seriously wrong with this ideology. Folks, look, this is hurting people. Real communities, real families. Pride Month rolls around and everybody's willing to wave the rainbow flag. Companies are going to change their logos and make some virtue signaling announcement about how much they care, but nobody really cares. People are so much more content in just towing the line and jumping aboard the train of disingenuous caring. And they don't actually want to fix anything. It's much easier for them to sit back and lambast us who are trying to make a difference. And those of us who actually care, who truly, genuinely care, are made out to be the enemies. The dialogue shut down and people continue to get hurt. But there's more. Relationships and marriage provide a unique fulfillment that you can't often find anywhere else. Unfortunately for the homosexual community, that fulfillment isn't there. 47% of homosexual males report to being molested, compared to just 7% of heterosexual men. Between 24 and 90% of lesbians report being psychologically abused by their partners. 50% of lesbians have reported sexual abuse. According to one study, only 4.5% of homosexual men are actually faithful in their relationship, compared to 75% of heterosexual men. And most long-term relationships between gay men last less than 8 years. One study in Berlin showed that up to 83% of gay men in a reportedly steady relationship had frequent affairs within the last year. Folks, I take no pride in saying that I could literally do this all day. There's mountains of evidence and studies out there that just point to the harm of this entire ideology, and it's continuing to get worse and worse. Now, I want to take a second to speak directly to any member of the LGBTQ community who may find themselves watching this video, and re-emphasize that this does not come from a place of hate. I know that it's not often that you're presented with this kind of counter-narrative, but none of this is unfounded, and it really does come from a place of sincerity. Most recently, popular conservative commentator Milo Yiannopoulos has turned away from his previous life of homosexuality and is actually pursuing virtue in his Catholic faith. And to everybody, I of course, as always, want to re-emphasize the pursuit of virtue over vice. Again, we're trying to build a more resilient, better, future Christian community for our nation, and it starts with the individual actions. And beyond that, it also takes some uncomfortable conversations. It doesn't do anybody any good to stay quiet about these things. And it's important, now more than ever, to be vocal in your local community about rights and wrongs, no matter the effect it may have on you. At the end of the day, folks, we're all here to help prop each other up with our own struggles in order to make a more moral, resilient, and prosperous nation for our children. Thanks so much for tuning in. God bless. Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. I really hope you got something out of this video. And if you like this kind of content, consider subscribing down below. As we continue to grow and expand, you can expect a lot more content coming from us in the future. And if this kind of content interests you, consider checking out our podcast playlist, where we go into a variety of different topics in much more detail that you may enjoy. Thanks so much. God bless. Have a great day.